Let me just welcome everybody. Let me welcome you to this week's Future Trends Forum. I'm delighted to see you here. We have a terrific guest with a great topic, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Now, before we begin that conversation, let me introduce the forum. Let me explain how it works, who supports it, and how the technology functions. So to begin with, the forum is a conversation-based venue. We're all about discussion and interchanges between people. What I'm doing right now with this slide up here, I'm only doing for just a minute, and that's going to stop. The rest of the hour is going to be all about face-to-face, voice-to-voice, word-to-word conversation. Now, this is a spin-off of a longer-running project, the Future Trends in Technology and Education Report. And that's a monthly trends analysis that looks at the trends reshaping higher education and technology. If you haven't seen it, go to ftte.us, download some sample issues, and subscribe. Now, both the FTTE report and the Future Trends Forum are part of a broader project called the Future Education Observatory. Now, this is a long-running, multimedia, participatory attempt to grapple with where higher education is headed. It includes these services that we mentioned before, along with a bookstore, along with a book club, and some more stuff coming up soon. Seeing that, just go to futureofeducation.us and you can learn more. Now, we can only do this work with the support of some generous supporters, and I'd like to thank them before we proceed. To begin with, I'd like to thank NYSERNet in New York State. That's a not-for-profit that helps that state's colleges and universities get online and do great things through broadband networking. They do tremendous work, and we're really grateful to them for their support. We're also grateful to Shindig, because as you can see here, Shindig makes available the technology we're using right now. So let me just walk you through that if you're new to the Shindig environment. So first of all, where I am right now, and where these slides are just for a minute, is called the stage. And we call it that because everybody involved in this video event can see and hear everything that goes on up here. In fact, our guest is going to be here in just a minute, and you can join us up here if you like. Now, right below us, if you look around, you will see dozens of either silhouettes or video feeds where you can see, or pictures of people, and those each represent one login from somewhere in the earth. Usually they represent one person, maybe a few sitting around a table. So each of those are the participants in this conversation. And if you'd like to know more about them, you can just mouse over one of them and get a little bit of sign-in information, or you could double click on them. And if they'd like to talk to you, the two of your icons will click together like Legos. You could have your own private audiovisual conversation. Now, this is all about conversation, and let me show you 3 ways that you can participate as we go. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, the key features are located in a white strip running along it. On the left edge, you'll see an icon that looks like a bunch of human heads in silhouette and the number 32. If you click on that, 2 windows will pop up. One of those will give you a little bit more information on every participant here. To the right of that is a chat box, and that's a great place to just share information about what we're talking about, to share URLs, resources that come up, or to formulate ideas, or just to chit chat and say hello to people in the community. Now, go back to that white strip. Next to what I just talked about, you'll see a question mark with a circle around it. If you click that, up will pop a new box, and that lets you type in a question or a comment. Now, when the time is right, I can flash that comment on the screen, and I can also read it out loud so everybody can hear it. Now, if, on the other hand, you have a camera that's working and a microphone that's working and you're in a place where you can talk out loud and not get in trouble, then go back to that white strip and click on the raised hand with the question, with a circle around it. That tells us that you'd like to join us up here on stage. So if your technology is working, press that button and we'll beam you up. It takes about 3.5 seconds, and then you can join us. In fact, we have room on stage for 4 people at a time. So there can be myself, our guest, and 2 of you. Consider it a pop-up panel on the fly. So those are 3 different ways, video, text, chat, that you can converse and share information. If that's not enough, if you're a Twitter user, you can just head over to Twitter and use the hashtag FTTE. We already have 1 question there, and we'd be glad to see your comments and thoughts there. So that's how the technology works. You'll see how it goes. A lot of it's much easier to do than I just described, but we're really grateful to Shindig for making the technology available. And we're also grateful to another group. We're grateful to our supporters on Patreon. Now, if you haven't seen Patreon, that's a crowdfunding site that supports people making stuff. In this case, it's our making stuff about the future of education. And you can see from this slide, we have people who contribute as much as $10 or more a month just to keep all the lights on and keep the machines humming nicely. We're really grateful to them for their support. We're also grateful to the people who have just signed on over the past few weeks. I just want to name them quickly in recognition of them. That's Robert R. Daniel, Scott Butke, Lear Lobo, Warren Blythe, and Seth Goodman. Thank you for joining us. And if you haven't joined them, go to patreon.com/Brian Alexander and take a look. In fact, on the bottom left of your screen, you should see a little widget that'll let you click on that. Now, that's who supports us. That's how the technology works. That's how we came up with all of this. Those are our ideas. Now, let me introduce this week's awesome guest. So, we have with us today Dr. Rebecca Ferguson from Britain's Open University. And you should know, Rebecca, that we have a lot of Open University fans in our American audience. So some of them will just come in to say, "Go Open University."
That's what I like to hear.
Excellent, excellent. Dr. Ferguson does an awful lot of great work with enterprises like FutureLearn. Thank you so much. I'm really glad you could make it.
I'm pleased to be here. Pleased to meet everyone.
Well, friends, I'm going to ask a couple of introductory questions, but please, this is a place for you to ask your questions, for you to raise your own concerns, to share examples. And so as we go, please think about those different buttons on the white strip or your Twitter comments to ask more questions. So to begin with, just to get things started, let me ask, what are you going to be working on for the rest of 2019? What are the big projects and the big issues that will be occupying your reign?
Oh, well, there's a couple of big things that I'm working on at the moment. The first thing is the Open University is trying out running formal learning on FutureLearn at the moment. So we've got, I don't know, about 60, 70 Moocs up there. And now we're trying moving postgraduate qualifications over there. So I'm taking over a 60 credit postgraduate qualification. So it's about a third of a master's degree. We just started that at the beginning of February. We're trying it out. We're experimenting with using the conversational learning, which is sort of underpins the platform. That's slightly different to working with Moodle, which is what we'd normally do. So we've sort of rewritten the course from scratch to see how it works there. We've got about 100 students in there trying it out. It's a course about technology enhanced learning, foundations and futures. So we've got a lot of people.
Yeah, terrific.
Yeah, we've got people from all around the world getting involved, building knowledge together, sharing resources. It is really good for getting different perspectives and you know, because it doesn't matter how expert people at the Open University are, we don't, you know, if we tell you about citizen science, we don't know about citizen science in Zambia. We don't know what it's like doing citizen science near Beijing, but our students do. And so they come in and give their perspective on all these different pedagogies, which is great.
That's, for me, always been one of the hidden strengths of Moocs, is that transnational enrollment. In fact, the 2 Moocs I've taken on FutureLearn have both been massively global, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, and it's something we really wanted to build into the course, not just to go, oh, here we are on a different platform, but to say, these are the advantages of this platform, and we really want our students to benefit from that. And so far, I mean, the amount of comments they wrote in the first 8 weeks, we did a word count on it, and word count was the equivalent of Gone with the Wind.
That's a lot of discussion.
It's the beginning of February.
Wow.
Yeah.
Marvelous. Marvelous. Well, let me ask then, so that gives us a little introduction to you and what you're working on. Looking at your report, you identify these 10 wonderful pedagogies. Can you just give us a sense, first of all, what was your process for deriving these? How did you come up with that wonderful set?
Okay, so we've been running the report annually since 2012. So we come up with 10 every year. And we tend to work with a different partner every year.
Mm. Mm.
So last year we worked with the Slate Institute, who are based in Bergen in Norway. And previously we've worked with partners in the US and Singapore and around the world to get different perspectives. So we originally have a meetup by Skype to meet each other, introduce ourselves, talk a bit about the report, talk a bit about what we've done before. And then we get people to throw ideas into the hat, from their perspective, what are the up and coming ideas? And because we're working with a lot of people who are experts in their field, they're going to a lot of conferences, they're doing a lot of practitioner events, they're on social media, they're very interconnected. So they see things coming up on the horizon, they've possibly tried them out. They throw all those into the hat. We put something up on Twitter saying, has anybody else got any ideas? We don't confine it to us. We'd probably come up with, 30, 35 each year. There's some get pulled over from the last year, which we didn't think were quite, important enough. So we bring them back into the mix. And then we all vote on them. So you vote for your favourites, you vote for the ones which you think are the most up and coming, most interesting. The 12 which are the most interesting, we explore a bit further, we do some research, we write an abstract for it, and then we look at those 12 abstracts and go, okay, those 2 didn't really make the cut this year, we take them out. So then we're down to 10. So once we've got the 10 pedagogies, we usually get a couple of writers working on each one, exploring them. They'll probably know quite a lot about them already. They'll explore them in more detail. A problem we have, because the people writing are academics, is academics are used to writing for academics.
Yes.
And so cutting it down into words which people will understand who are outside academia is quite complicated.
Yes.
Because people come back to me and say, but I have to have the word epistemology in there. No, you don't. Go and write easy words. So it's supposed to be about the level you could read as a first year undergraduate, and there's a lot of toing and froing on that. So we do a draft of it, and then we pass it on to somebody else. They revise the draft, then it comes over to me. I revise the revised draft, and finally it gets out there.
Well, thank you for describing that process. That sounds like a very productive, fairly streamlined and collaborative, and also a possibly fun process. Reminds me a bit of the Horizon Report.
Yeah, talking to people about these different ideas, following up the pedagogies, investigating them further, having conversations about that. It's really a good thing to do.
Oh, terrific. Well, let me... So, friends, I'm just going to quickly list the 10 pedagogies from the report, and I'm going to list them in the order they appear. If you haven't had a chance to read it yet, it's freely available online. I sent a link out. And if you have read it, I'll just quickly summarize this. And then I'd like to invite you all to ask questions of Rebecca concerning these different pedagogies, and as well of the process that she just described. So they include playful learning, learning with robots, decolonizing learning, drone-based learning, learning through wonder, action learning, virtual studios, place-based learning, making thinking visible, and making the roots of empathy happen. These are each of these I find very rich. The report has good examples and a very clear discussion. As Rebecca just mentioned, a very accessible discussion. I think that's just by itself, this is a great roadmap for any educator or any institution looking ahead. I would start off by asking you about a few of these. Thinking about learning through wonder, did you have any specific technological components for that, or is that really just kind of universal pedagogy?
So one of the things we've done with Innovating Pedagogy is we really didn't want to focus on technology. We felt when we started work on this, which was about 2012, that the Horizon reports at that point were very much geared towards new technologies that were exciting. And we were a bit dubious about basing things on technology. We were much more interested in thinking about the pedagogy. So obviously, a lot of the pedagogies which are new and innovative have got technology involved in them. But in other cases, we were interested in perhaps new takes on old pedagogies. So learning through wonder obviously is not a new pedagogy. It's not as if somebody sat down last year and went, wonder, that sounds intriguing. But what it was a researcher had investigated wonder in a bit more detail, come up with processes for bringing it into the classroom, a sort of framework for thinking about it, so that rather than using wonder in your classroom sort of by happen chance, you could really design a curriculum around it, think about the resources, think about the ways that you could approach it. So nothing individually new, but innovative in the way that you could just read that section and think, hey, I'm going to do that in my classroom. Especially if you're working with children sort of age 5 to 11, where you find it easier to implement that in your classroom straight away. And that's one of the things we wanted to do. We didn't want all our pedagogies to be ones that you'd think, well, that sounds really cool. Now let me go and see if I can get $50,000 out of the principal to implement this. What we wanted was something that you could read it, you could think, yeah, that makes sense to me. Now I'm going to go and try that out.
You could implement it. I mean, these are all really, really practical. Very low bar for achieving a lot of these, or starting to. We have one question that came up on Twitter. This came from the excellent Andrew Peterson, who says, I love innovative pedagogy, but we need innovative assessment to catch up. How do you see assessment keeping pace or not keeping pace with pedagogy?
Okay, so we have had a couple around assessment in the past. One of them was stealth assessment, where you sort of build the assessment into what students are doing anyway, so that they don't see it as here is a separate scary thing that is going on. It's just something which is going on all the time in the background. Another one we've had is around analytics. We had one last year around learner-centered analytics, about learners thinking, what is it that I want to know about my learning? So don't just give me a standard set of analytics. Let me select what it is that I want to know. And that might be around, my marks, how I'm progressing. It might be how much I'm engaging. It might be what I need to be doing. So that's sort of assessment seen from a different angle, seen from the student's angle.
I see.
There's also an aspect of one of this year's pedagogies, learning with robots. The idea that now that robots are more able to understand human speech, and we're seeing that with things like Amazon, the Echo and things like that, that you can get a student to teach something to a robot, and by doing that, they can see if they understand it. And in some circumstances, students like robots better because they're sort of non-judgmental, and they'll sit there and they will put up with, whatever you come up with. not for everyone, but for some people in some situations, just the idea that you can keep coming back, you can keep having another go at it, see if it works. The robot's there endlessly patiently.
That's excellent. That's excellent. Those are 3 great answers. And I did mention this before, but you've done a lot of work on data analytics and learning analytics. You're, in fact, one of the world's authorities. So thank you for that. Friends, I have more questions based on the report. But again, this is one that should be driven by you. So I would love to hear what you would like us to be focusing on, which of these pedagogies seems most interesting, or if there are any other questions or comments that you'd like to raise. In particular, if you've been exploring any of these, be they teaching with drones or trying to teach empathy, this is a great time to share and ask for feedback. So while you're doing that, let me thank the previous questioner for that question. Let me ask about how. This is a tricky one. Some of these involve learners expressing themselves. They involve learners sharing their thinking. That's under making thinking visible, for example. Some of them involve learners acting on the world stage, or at least in the local stage, like with decolonizing learning. Some of them involve using larger platforms that are publicly accessible, which I support and I think is fantastic. But I wonder, what are the dangers of doing this now, especially for secondary and primary school kids, given that we have so many concerns about so many challenging problems with communication online, from trolling to abuse to algorithmic bias?
Yeah, I think one of the answers there is that this isn't solely designed for teaching sort of K to 12.
Right.
It's for practitioners and policymakers at all levels. So some of these will be designed for university teaching. Some of these will be continuing professional development. Some of them will be training for the workplace. So we're not looking at all of them and going, yes, of course, you could take these into the classroom and they would work with your 8-year-old. Some of them wouldn't. Some of them would need to be addressed in different ways.
Right.
And one of the things which we took up quite strongly last year was, there was the whole big issue of fake news coming up.
Right.
And we were thinking, well, actually, as educators, there isn't a lot in education about how you deal with this sort of thing specifically. So obviously, if you're coming up through a humanities discipline, you learn about how to read things, how to interpret things. But that sort of rigorous learning about how to make sense of what you see on social media, how to spot fake news, how to assess whether a source is trustworthy, really isn't something that we address in our curriculums, or certainly not something that I see addressed in the UK. So actually, I've in the past, I've done work with sort of 10, 11-year-olds about how they research and how they found things out online. And I talked to them and they said, our teachers have told us we must not use Wikipedia because it's unreliable. I said, right. What do you do? They said, we use Wiki Answers. And but Wiki Answers is to a large extent a wiki written by children in response to homework and is completely unreliable. But because they hadn't been given a reason not to use Wikipedia, and they didn't understand the principles behind why they shouldn't use Wikipedia, they just saw it as a site they should avoid. And I also had a child who was doing some, trying to find something out about a pop group that he liked at the time. He was trying to find out if the lead singer had been arrested or not. He said, well, I went to 5 sites and 4 of them said he had, and then the BBC said he hadn't. I said, oh, that's interesting. So which one did you choose? Well, he said, well, obviously the BBC was wrong. Because oh, yeah, and again, his perception was that the sites which agreed with each other and agreed with what he wanted to be true were going to be the reliable sites.
For confirmation bias.
Exactly. So this was the sort of thing that we were taking into account last year. So last year we had a piece on navigating post-truth societies with a whole framework of ways that you can work with students to get them to assess the trustworthiness of a source, to think through what they're reading, to approach things critically, and to do this in particular with reference to social media. So that was one of the ways that we addressed this sort of this being online. We also had one last year about intergroup empathy, which was about understanding the perspectives of other groups, perhaps ones which you've traditionally been taught to fear or not to trust, and about finding technological ways of bridging those gaps. And actually, last year we were working with partners in Israel who done a sort of lot of pertinent work in this area, and we're thinking about ways that people can meet online, that they could meet through avatars, that they could hear perspectives through simulations, and just moving together that they wouldn't be able to do in the physical world, but that they could perhaps do online.
Well, those are some great answers and some nice possibilities. These are also, friends, these are themes that some of them that we've touched on with previous guests as well, including information literacy, digital literacy, fake news. But I'm really struck by this idea of using technology to help bring people together who are separated by various reasons, various ideologies, passions, and beliefs. But I don't want to completely hog the mic. And in fact, we have a couple of questions that have come up, and then we just bring one of these up right now from the awesome Gloria Dougherty. So Gloria asks, could you share some of the distinctives you discovered when redesigning traditional courses that would be taught in the Future Learn platform?
Okay. Right. I think one of the things that we were really focusing on was how different a pedagogy of conversational learning can be to other online courses. So I don't know if you're familiar with how Future Learn has been structured, so that
why don't you say a few words about that?
Okay, so it was designed with the idea that at any point you could talk directly about the content you were learning about. So in most platforms, you'd read some content or you'd do an activity, and then if you wanted to talk about it, you would go somewhere else to a forum and you would have a discussion. You might start a thread on that discussion, but you'd have to go somewhere else. In Future Learn, there are discussions directly associated with every piece of learning material. The idea is that you develop an understanding by you asking questions about why things happen, you're asking questions about how things happen, and it's a pedagogy that works at scale. So it's one where you really benefit, as you were saying from your experience with Mooc, if you've got more learners there. So when the first really big Moocs came out, and I'm not talking about the early connectivist Moocs, which had a couple of hundred, and people go, oh, wow, we've got 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 learners. And that's like, well, that's great for a headline, but is that of any benefit to the learners? Would they like to be in a class of 100,000, or would they really rather be in a class of 10? Would it be better for them? So when Future Learn was set up, the idea was, well, how can we make use of the fact that there's so many learners in the room, and also that because these are free courses, you haven't got the money to put a whole load of teachers in to support them. And so the idea was, well, if we've got this opportunity to share perspectives, to share resources, to get involved into discussions, we can really take that forward, and people will think, oh yeah, that's great, there's somebody in here who's got something I hadn't thought of, and that the teachers can think that, and then the second time you run the course you can incorporate that within it, so you can make it richer and richer. I remember one of the first Moocs which went up on Future Learn was it seemed really obscure to me, but the University of Birmingham in the UK did one on dental photography.
Quite precise.
I thought, nobody's going to be interested in doing dental photography on that. But strangely, lots of people were interested in dental photography because, of course, all these people were spread around the world and they were the only person in their area. And I remember somebody coming on from, I think, Chile and saying there is nobody doing this sort of work within 1,000 miles of me, and it can achieve so much. I had to have this community and to be able to share ideas. And you could see from that out of that Mooc was going to come a group of people who could work together and stay in touch and really benefit from that, far beyond what you'd get in a sort of 4-week Mooc. And I've seen that time and time again coming out of Moocs, that people want to take it forward, that they want to stay in touch, they want to continue having conversations. So we really wanted to get that going in the postgraduate course that we've taken over there. And I've only been doing it for 2 months, but it seems to be working so far. So we're pleased about that.
How long does the class go?
It runs now till the end of September.
So, okay, so overall the summer into fall. Very good. That's a great experience and an unusual one for based on the usual reputation of Moocs. Good question, Gloria. Thank you very much. For everybody else, just to make it a little easier, I'm going to put up a little widget here on the screen. This is called a podium. You should see up here on the stage a kind of teal-colored box with a little podium in the middle of it. So if your camera and mic are working, just click that and you'll pop up on stage. So that's an easier way to join us, I think. Well, thinking about that question of engagement and how important that is, and I love the way that kind of blog style that you've attached so much participation, so many participation frameworks onto each piece of learning content there. How does that lead you to the 10th point of empathy? I mean, one of the I hate to go back to my earlier pessimistic theme about abuse online, but it seemed to me quite bold and very good that you called for more empathy in a time when we seem to be experiencing less. I mean, how do you, either in general or in particular through the case of FutureLearn, how do you advise us to advance the cause of empathy through technologically mediated education?
Okay, so the roots of empathy actually isn't a technological thing. It's an idea that was developed in Canada, and it's one which is carried out with what I would call school children, sort of children aged probably about 5 to 9 years old.
Okay, primary school.
And the idea is that a parent brings a baby into the classroom, and that becomes the classroom's baby, and that through interacting with that baby, through learning about how the baby develops, through creating things for that baby, through singing to that baby, children develop sort of emotional awareness, reduced aggression. For children who don't have that sort of experience, perhaps, of close relations with a parent or close relations with a smaller child, it opens up possibilities for relationships that they haven't got. It allows others to sort of share their understanding of how you relate to smaller people, how you look after them, how you care for them, developing a sense of responsibility. And this has been tried out in many schools across, I think, North America and Europe, and the results appear to be very good. I don't know to what extent they are skewed by the research as being very much in favour of this as an idea. But the results that I have seen says it develops emotional understanding in the children who are involved, encourages their social behaviour, it reduces aggression, it reduces the sort of problems of conflict in the classroom. So it sounded a really, really great idea. But it hasn't evolved going online to any extent whatsoever. And we've got a couple of pictures in the report, but they were pictures that we went to people involved and said, "Are you okay for us to share these in the report?" So it's not something that would normally be shared widely online.
Well, that's a fantastic exercise. I wonder if something similar could be done with either through online mediation based on face-to-face events. So the class asks people to go into the offline world and engage with an animal or a baby, or if it can be simulated, digitally, either through a robot or through an avatar. Friends, I'd like to ask you, if you could, think about this point of empathy, and what are some of the ways that you see us being able to teach empathy or to inculcate empathy in education, either through technology, as I've mentioned, or without technology, as Rebecca just noted? Take a minute to think about this, and then put in your answer, either through the raised hand button, or by clicking the podium, or by typing in the question mark. While you're thinking of that, we have another question that just came on, and this is from Matt Schneider in Baltimore. And he asks, what are some techniques or activities that you've used to increase empathy amongst adult learners? I've used a reflective digital storyboarding project in the past, but always looking for more ideas. Good question.
Okay, so in this case, I can't say that this is stuff that I've done personally. This year, The Roots of Empathy was written up by the team at Slate in Norway. And last year, it was written up by the team at the Links Lab in Israel. So I would have to refer back. Let me refer back to last year's report to give you some of the ideas that were coming out last year. So some of the ideas for Intergroup Empathy that they had last year was mediation. So that's helping people to overcome negative feelings about other group. It encourages them to participate in a constructive way.
Through an active mediator who actually does that work?
Through an active mediator. Gamification. So that team had actually developed some games where you could interact with the other group, but you're, of course, interacting with them in a completely non-threatening virtual context. You didn't even have to, you could just be playing with a virtual version of them, not even with the real people. There's role playing, so sort of taking on persona of somebody perhaps from a different group and thinking about trying to describe how they think about things and seeing things from their perspective.
Sure.
Virtual reality gives you a way of encountering each other in perhaps a safer environment.
Yes.
I think you've got to be careful doing that sort of thing in virtual reality. I mean, I remember times in Second Life where people were having all-out wars in Second Life. So you've got to have thought through, and you've got to have that in a safe environment. But that can be an option. Just imagined contact. So you're doing this in a sort of storytelling way. You don't need technology. You can be doing that in a face-to-face contact. You can be doing that through theatre. You can be doing that through art. And you can sort of make inroads into talking to people by coming up with neutral or constructive issues to discuss. So you're not discussing the things that you disagree on. You're discussing the things that you would like to achieve together, the things that you would like to make better.
Yes.
So those are just some of the things which came up in last year's report, and you can download that from the website as well if you'd like to look at it in more detail.
Those are great practices. We can certainly use implementing more of them in a wide variety of places. Matt, thank you for asking. Matt, if you get a chance, we'd love to have you up on stage if you can. Once, Rebecca, I was working with Texas University and teaching a digital storytelling workshop. And several professors came to me very excited by this. And they said, we really, really want to have our subjects do digital stories in order to instill empathy in our students. I said, well, could you explain that? And they said, yes. We all teach criminal justice, and most of our students are very draconian and believe very strongly in capital punishment and extensive penal punishment. And they wanted to have prisoners tell digital stories in order to help, cross that divide and share that space. We have a whole series of topics that come up that we haven't addressed yet, and I'd like to try and experiment along with that. I want to try using a new function here in the Shiddig interface, and this is a polling tool. And what I'd like to ask you is, one of the options, one of the 10 pedagogies here, the second one is learning with robots. And I'm curious, how many of you have had a chance to actually teach with robots or learn from robots or support that in classes? And that may be informally or within school. So why don't you give it a shot? And if you haven't had a chance to do this yet, simply click the raised hand to tell us that you are agreeing that this is something you have done. And if you have not done, don't say anything at all. And we will tabulate this in just a minute. Now, we also had a quick observation that from a few different people about digital literacy and how important they think that is for curriculum, and how they want to see more and more of that in education, both in primary, secondary levels, but also in post-secondary. And I have to agree. That's a very powerful idea and a very powerful tool. Let's see.
And I think it's one which is developing over time as well, because when you look back about 10 years, people were developing frameworks for information literacy.
Even further back to the 1980s, in fact.
Yeah, exactly. And sort of moving towards digital literacy over time. But the elements of digital literacy, I think, are shifting year by year. I'm seeing many more calls now for data literacy, because
yes,
data makes up so much of our world. And we see more and more people being worried about it, being skeptical about it, but not really understanding it, and what can be done and what is going on and how data are being used. Students are very unaware of what data is collected about them, how it is used. And so I think data literacy has become almost part of a digital literacy. But you don't really see the frameworks out there which sort of say, well, this is what you might begin by doing, this is what you might expect to be doing at a different level.
Just for data literacy?
How these things develop is quite a complicated thing to do, which I've not seen done well so far.
It really is. I mean, there's some great people. Doug Belshaw in the UK. There's Jessica's done some work, but data literacy is still, I think, almost universally people think it's a good thing, but there's very little traction on that on the ground. There are some quantitative learning centers in American universities, but that's very narrowly focused, I think, not on general data literacy. Well, I polled. Oh, please go ahead.
It's like the assumption that you won't want to know this stuff until you're 18, 19, 20, whereas you actually need to know this stuff, right from a very early age to understand what's going on in society around you.
Quite. And we teach some forms of data literacy by accident through in primary and secondary school, through grading, through class ranking. So they're already used to this, and if they're interested in sports or in games, they're starting to get a basic sense of it. So in a sense, the curriculum kind of excludes it, which is a mistake. Well, I polled you all, and then I accidentally ended the poll, but that's okay, because it looks like something like one of you is actually involved in using robots. So I think, Rebecca, at least for this crowd, you are ahead of the curve in a massive way. Let me ask a related question, which is a different item on your list of 10, was learning through drones, which was fascinating.
Learning through drones. I'd ask, has nobody used Logo in their classroom? Has nobody used those little robots that you program to draw circles and squares? I can't think of the word for them.
Yes, yes, yeah. There are a bunch of tools like this. So if anybody has had any experience with Logo or with Lego Mindstorms or some of the games that are aimed at teaching coding, please throw up your hand. We'd love to hear from you. And while you're thinking of that, if you are involved in teaching with drones at all, please raise your hand so we can add you to the poll. I have to say I have only taught myself variously bad drone piloting. I've learned just an active danger I am to the community with being a drone pilot. But I have learned quite a bit through having friends do it and explore areas from above. Let's see what we have. It looks like almost nobody is using drones. Once again, Rebecca, I think you have a very forward-looking view here on where we could be going with pedagogy.
Well, it was interesting, actually, because we've got a drone on the front cover of the report. And when we were deciding what to put on the front cover, I thought, okay, it'd be cool to have a drone.
Sure.
I wonder who's got a drone. And so I asked in our department, because we deal with educational technology, I thought we're the most likely. And people went, oh, no, I haven't got one. I'll put one up on something up on the internet. And suddenly all these people all over the university were coming and going, yes, I've got a drone. Yeah, we use a drone for this or that or the other. I know a couple of years ago I was taking my daughter around university departments. She wanted to study geography. And almost every geography department we turned up at, one of the things they would show us was, we've got these drones and we're doing this work with drones and it's really cool. Get it out and they fly it around. And so we do see them in use more and more. So people may not be using them in their teaching, but they've probably encountered them elsewhere. It's quite likely. I know my husband's running group, they've got a drone, and when they all go out en masse, somebody flies the drone up and takes group pictures. Yes, they're all very proud of group pictures from the drone.
One of the ways that drone pilots make money in the States is by doing wedding photography. And people really like being able to zoom above and see the crowd and the bride and the groom and everything. This is an old pattern in educational technology now, where we have informal learning or just the consumer space really advancing, and then academia just kind of pokes at that and grabs a few pieces of it. So it maybe this takes some time. Matt Schneider, who spoke before or asked a question before, mentions that one of Johns Hopkins University's most popular courses use drones to discuss aerodynamics and aerospace engineering. And he says he goes on, I don't design the course, but we gave each student a drone, which has got to be the best use of a student support fee ever done. I mean, that's terrific. So we'd like to, Matt, thank you very much. And if you want to say more, you can join us up here on stage, but thank you. That's a really interesting example. I mean, it kind of makes sense, being that drones are aerodynamic objects. They are aircraft in that sense. Well, I'm conscious of time, and we have just barely 10 minutes left. And so I'd like to raise one of the more challenging pedagogies that you identified in your 10, which is decolonizing learning. And I'm curious, what kind of practices did your group and your Norwegian colleagues identify for this to happen? I mean, especially, I'm thinking both in terms of the general canonicity and the curriculum and pedagogy of universities as well as schools, but also of the technology involved. How do you decolonize educational technology or the broader space of technology?
Well, when we began thinking about this, it was because we talked to colleagues in South Africa, where decolonizing learning is a big issue. We decided, yes, it's something we really want to cover. But the majority of people in our authoring group come from colonizing nations. So we thought it's not particularly appropriate for us to be the people who write this. Yes. Luckily, one of the researchers working with us is a Native American, comes from Washington State, I think the Lummi tribe, and his family had been involved in work around decolonizing education, or the equivalent, for a couple of generations. So we said, this is great, you can take over this section and give a much more nuanced perspective than us. And what's raised is very important. He was sort of moving away from the curriculum, because we were thinking this is about pedagogy rather than curriculum. The curriculum is discussed in many places. But it was thinking about what is it about how you approach learning. And he said, well, one of the problems is about what you define as success. And if success is defined in the terms of one set of people, it's not necessarily synonymous with the success of people who've been colonized in the past. So he said success for Indigenous students is often seen in terms of preserving their culture and developing their culture, revitalizing their culture. It's perhaps seen in terms of nation building, in terms of sort of establishing their place in society and where they want to be. It's about using education to serve the needs of the local community. In terms of technology, one of the aspects that comes up is around Moocs, because, of course, we largely see Moocs coming from the big colonial powers. There's a lot of British Moocs, we see Spanish Moocs, we see French Moocs, US Moocs. We don't see a lot of Moocs from smaller countries that have been colonized. And so there can be a sense, and I've seen this in several venues, of, we have got the good education, we take the good education to the people who don't know about education. We take our perspectives, we take our views, we take our ways of doing things, without regard for how people might learn there. So one of the things that our author talked to me about, I said, well, tell me about some of the ways that you learned when you were younger. And he said, well, one of the things you learnt was that the longer you stayed up, the more things you could learn. And it was the people who stayed around the campfire till about 3 a.m. They'd hear the good stuff, because the people who weren't that interested, weren't that committed, had left, and the people who were left were the elders who knew things and were willing to share them with people who sort of proved their commitment. And I thought, it's a whole new perspective, which you don't get when you go to school from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. You don't have that sense, if I stayed up really late, I'd get some good stuff. So that's just one of the examples. I mean, another of the technological examples he used was around video games. Some video game, well, quite a lot of video games have a sort of fairly colonial perspective to them. So you can play those games with the grain, or you can play them against the grain, and you can say, well, hang on, let's see this from the other side. What's happening from the other side? Let's critique it. And there are also games designed by Native American games designers, for example, around water resources, around oil pipelines, around... You mentioned
Thunderbird Strike.
Thunderbird Strike, sort of throwing yourself into a different way of thinking about things, and perhaps not the mainstream way of thinking about things. So, we only get 3 pages to talk about this, but I think that's a sort of good set of ideas, a sort of introduction to thinking about how you might move forward with it as a pedagogy.
Yes, very good. And in fact, in that section, you referenced one of the most famous and popular computer games of all time, Civilization, for that. Um, this is a tricky topic, and this has come up before in the forum, and we've had this as a theme of how to decolonize curriculum as well as pedagogy. Friends, let me just give you. We are at the end of the hour. Let me give you one last chance for your last questions and comments. My apologies. One of my cats just jumped on my lap because he is a big video fan, so he's here to join us. I'll see if he has any comments or questions. But let me ask one last one myself, just to get people rolling, which is thinking not of teachers so much as support staff, as well as institutions as a whole. What are some of the ways that you would recommend colleges and universities explore these new pedagogies? I mean, how can they support them? You mentioned they were lower cost. What are some of the strategies they should look at for doing this?
When we've looked at innovation in terms of technology enhanced learning, we've found that one of the reasons that innovations often fail is that they only take into account certain groups or certain aspects of what's going on. So there's typically a focus on the learners, sometimes a focus on the educators. There's very rarely a focus on really thinking through if management is going to support you in this, if they're going to give you the resources for it. There's very little thought about scheduling or timetabling. Are you going to be in the right room for it? Are you going to be in the room which has got the good internet? Has somebody else got the laptops today? And there's also very little thought, and I've experienced this particularly working with sort of primary schools. Who is going to give you the technical support? Because I don't know how it works where you are, but I was involved with a school which had 500 children below the age of 11. It had one technical support staff who would come in 2 days a week, and he had to update the operating system for every single computer. He had to sort out every internet problem. When the internet whiteboard projector lights went, he had to replace the bulbs. And you have these problems where people don't think about the support staff and only think about, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this? Right. And if there's more thinking about the context and about bringing people in, about, that guy never got trained on any of these new cool things, but he was expected to support them. And I think that happens time and time again, that innovations sort of fall into the sand because you haven't got the support in place and you didn't think about it in advance.
Still, even in 2019, this is still a problem.
I think so.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's very solid advice, and that is definitely the voice of experience. Here, let me let my cat bid you adieu. And we are at the top of the hour, so I need to, with regret, bid you adieu as well. Thank you so much, Rebecca, both for organizing this great report, as well as for spending a very generous hour with us, answering my questions and unfolding your thoughts based on your lifetime of tremendous work in this field. Thank you so much. One last question to ask you: how can we best keep up with you? What are the ways that we can keep up with your new work?
I'm on Twitter, so you can catch up with me on Twitter. You can follow me on SlideShare, but I would suggest following the Innovating Pedagogy site, because we get a new report up there every year. Very good.
That'll work. Well, in the meantime, good luck with the next report. I can't wait to hear who your next dance partner is, and as well as what your conclusions are. And in the meantime, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Pleasure. Now, don't leave anybody because we have the chance to explore what we'll be doing next. So, coming up over the next week, some important details. One is that next week's guest is going to be Patty O'Sullivan from the University of Mississippi. And she is one of the leaders of a really interesting adaptive learning project. So, please join us. So, if you're interested in adaptive learning, where that can go, here is one that's already underway. Now, also underway is our book club. We are into the first two chapters of The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. We'll be in chapters 3 and 4 next week, so please join us for that. If you would like to purchase a copy of that or Rebecca's most recent book, please head to our bookstore where you can find all kinds of copies. And if you'd like to continue our conversation about this report or this topic, please join us on social media. You can find our groups on Slack, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. You can follow Shindig as well as myself on Twitter. In the meantime, thank you so much for participating this week. We look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.